As the global leader in choline, Balchem has spent more than 50 years perfecting the art and science of choline chloride production. The new Puricol line delivers the highest standards of quality, produced in state-of-the-art manufacturing facilities, and backed by the strictest process controls for a level of purity, safety, and consistency you can't find anywhere else. Turn to Puricol choline chloride from Balchem for an unmatched level of quality you can trust. Visit balchemanh.com to learn more.
Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Sorrell, Director of Global Marketing for Balchem, and I'll be your moderator today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series. Today's Real Science webinar will share a long-term outlook on global food demand. Populations and rising incomes are fueling demand for high-quality food. And while future demand for food is rising sharply, farmers are also becoming more efficient and consumers are seeking food produced in certain ways. Today, Brett Stuart, co-founder of Global AgriTrends, will give us a look at how these global trends are impacting ag today and how they will continue to change the landscape going forward. I would now like to introduce Brett Stuart. Brett is the founder and the president of Global AgriTrends. The firm was organized in 2006 and provides global market research, analysis, and forecasting to a variety of clients around the world. He was formerly the lead economist for the U.S. Meat Export Federation. He has conducted numerous research and analysis projects in the global meat trade arena, as well as advising government representatives on international trade issues. Mr. Stuart has conducted on-the-ground agriculture industry research for a variety of clients on 6 continents. Brett was raised on a cattle ranch operating in Utah and Wyoming before receiving an undergraduate degree in accounting at Utah State University and a master's of business administration from the University of Nebraska. Brett, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Scott. I'm just turning my screen on. It's great to be with you all today. I appreciate that intro. I love the dairy video. That was pretty interesting. It brought back a few memories. As Scott said, I grew up on a cattle ranch, and so I remember a lot of long days and being outside in the snow and the weather and being around animals. Seems like a long time ago now. I've been doing this for quite a while. But I appreciate Scott and Balchem in reaching out to link us up this morning. I have a big story for you, and I hope you're all sharp. I hope you're well caffeinated and ready to go this morning. We're going to talk about a lot, and this moves quickly, so just I need you sharp. Pay attention here. I love agriculture. I grew up in agriculture. I think it's fascinating. I saw a survey not long ago that said the number of Americans involved in agriculture is now less than 2%, less than 2% of the population involved in agriculture. And I thought, you know, that's not really fair. I think every American is involved in agriculture about 3 times a day. And it's funny when you talk about agriculture, I'll sit on a plane and talk to people and they'll ask what I do, whatever, and we get talking. And there's always this moment of, wow, I've never really thought about that. I've never really thought about food or where my food comes from. Even though every person needs food 3 times a day here in our country, very few ever really consider what it takes or where it comes from. I just think it's a fascinating story. So today we're going to talk about megatrends in global agriculture. And this is fun. I thoroughly enjoy this presentation. I spend a lot of time talking near-term markets and forecasting and prices and production. I like those too, but this is my fun one. Let's start out here. So I've got a picture of the globe there on my slide, and I use that one for a reason. Now, we're used to being Western Hemisphere citizens. We're used to seeing a globe that has North and South America on it. So I guess to us, this is the back of the Earth. If we're looking over our shoulder at the back of the Earth, this is an Australian-centered map, and I did this for a reason. I'm putting a circle on here now. That red circle, take a look at that. That red circle includes more than half of the world's population. There are more people living inside that circle than outside of that circle. Now, from an agriculture perspective, how much good green ground is there inside of that circle? That circle is India, China, Japan, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, Taiwan, Korea. Not much good green land. Isn't it shocking? There's a lot of ocean, there's a lot of desert, there's the Himalayas, but there's just not a lot of good green land. And so when we think about what's happening in global agriculture, this is a major impact. Years ago, it used to be all the loaded containers going across the Pacific to the east, bringing all the made in China computers, TVs, everything that we were buying out of China. And the backhaul was going west, back across the Pacific. Those were the empty containers. That's not true anymore. The containers going west are filled just like the ones coming east. And there is no backhaul. It's two-way trade now, and those containers are filled with food and food products. There's a massive sucking sound from within this circle right here that is really changing and shaping global agriculture today. So here's what I do. I do analysis of protein markets, mainly beef, pork, and poultry, and dairy. I do economic analysis, policy work, forecasting. We have an extensive network of clients and contacts around the world. I've done on-the-ground agriculture research now on 6 continents. I don't see a good reason to go to Antarctica. I think we'll leave it at 6. But we do this for a very diverse client base. We've got ag banks, Wall Street banks, hog farmers, cattle feeders, trade associations, feed companies, nutrition companies, everything across the global ag space. It really is a fun job. So I analyze these markets, I give my opinions on prices, exports, policies to a wide variety of groups, and then I speak at a lot of conferences and client meetings as well. So let's start out with this. I make a living trying to predict the future, which is very humbling. And I've read a few books in the last years, the last couple of years. One was The Black Swan, one was Thinking Fast and Slow. Some of these books that really have just shot holes in all of my theory that you can predict anything. And the premise of some of these books, the premise is that the future is unpredictable. What does the word unpredictable mean? Unable to predict, right? And so the question in my mind is, wait a minute, some trends are unmistakable. Is the future predictable or not? I'm gonna solve this for you with one picture. Is the future predictable? Right? This guy's about to get eaten. We all know that. You can look at this picture and say, I know what the future is going to bring. And I just love this. What a great friend that he had that could have saved his life, but instead captured this picture for all of us to see and enjoy for years to come. Actually, this was on the internet. It's probably photoshopped, but you see what I'm talking about, right? There are trends that are unmistakable. The future is predictable. So keep that in mind as we talk through this. We're going to start with megatrend number 1, simple math, more mouths, and is there enough? This is probably my favorite chart, and I have a lot of charts. Chart of world population going back to 5000 BC. Now, I have no idea how many people there were in 5000 BC, but these are the published estimates out there on world population. And coming from the perspective of agriculture, I just think this is fantastic. Think about this. More food may be needed in the next 100 years than was consumed in the last 7,000. That's incredible. And what happened? This is really a chart more about food than about people. In the 1800s, we industrialized agriculture. We learned how one farmer could feed 5 families instead of one farmer feeding 1 family. And as that began to spiral, agriculture productivity grew at the same rate this chart did. We didn't have any more land. We just learned how to farm incredibly well, and we're still learning. The productivity is still increasing. I just think this is unbelievable where we've been and where we're heading. The problem with this chart, though, some people look at this chart and they have the reaction of, we're all going to die, right? And they're right, we are all going to die, but we're not going to starve to death. Not anytime soon, not in our lifetimes, not in the next lifetime, after our lifetime, the next generation. But if you've read the book, Dan Brown wrote a book called Origin. Now, this is Dan Brown who wrote the Da Vinci Code, and his book Origin deals with this dilemma. And the whole premise of the book is about this and how do you resolve this? This is an exponential growth curve. Exponential growth curves never stop. This one will stop and it will slow, probably about 50 years after the last point on this chart, it will slow and decline. But as we go down that vein, when will the food shortages begin? And this is tough. This is my heavy slide. As a human being, this is hard to comprehend. It's completely unacceptable. 6,000 children perish every day due to malnourishment. 815 million considered food insecure today. I just can't even comprehend that. This picture right here, that was a picture taken in the 1990s in the Sudan during the famines. And the source of that picture was Kevin Carter. Kevin Carter won a Pulitzer Prize for that photo. It was a little girl making her way to a food camp. And nobody can look at that without the same feeling that this is absolutely unacceptable. The important thing I want to make here, the important point I want to make today, this is not due to productive capacity. This isn't because we can't produce enough food. There isn't hunger in the world because we just can't produce enough. We can overproduce everything, and we do most years. We have constant agriculture markets that are going through major cycle downturns where farmers go out of business. That means we're overproducing. We can't sell it profitably. Think about this, and I'll tell you, I have done the math. I did a project a few years back for a company that said, can we feed 9 billion people by 2050? And we ran all different scenarios. And the scenario that worked incredibly well was we have to allow technology and productivity to spread globally. We can easily feed 9 billion. We can bury the world in wheat, even with 9 billion people. But we cannot do it without spreading our productivity around the world. We can do it with less acres. We even ran that scenario. We can do it by freezing the resource footprint. We can still do it. But you've got to spread productivity around the world. Look at how we're farming. This is 2020. This is how we're farming in Africa, in China. It's absolutely incredible. There's really two methods of farming in the world, and here's how we farm in the US, and even that's antiquated. Today, that tractor wouldn't have a cab on it. It would be a GPS tractor pulling a 48-row corn planter. Look at our poultry production. We're incredibly efficient. But look at these two pictures. These are pictures from China. And it's not uncommon if you've traveled to China to see plow oxen. They are still farming in China the same way their ancestors were hundreds of years ago. They're still farming with oxen. The lady shelling corn in the bottom right picture, I took that picture years ago. That was during the corn harvest in northern China, and she's shelling corn by hand. China is the second largest corn producer in the world. Over 80% of that corn is still harvested by hand in China. It's unbelievable. They spread the corn all over the highways in the fall to dry it. At night, they sweep it up, put a tarp over it. The next morning, they pull the tarp off, sweep it out on the highways. You have to drive off the road in northern China during corn harvest because the roads are golden. They're covered with corn, trying to get their corn dry. It's unbelievable. But you think they're feeding 1.4 billion people, mostly self-sufficient with those farming methods. Here's what I'm really getting to. Let's look at a dairy example. The US and EU combined hold 14% of the world dairy cows and produce 43% of the world's milk. Brazil, India, and China have 73% of the world dairy herd and produce 37% of the milk. So think about what that means. Now, our cows consume more resources, absolutely, but you spread our productivity around the world, what you do is you reduce the maintenance cost of that cow. And as you reduce the maintenance cost per pound of milk, you see the productivity go through the roof. I could show you a swine chart, cattle, rice, wheat, corn, fill in the blank. productivity on everything has gone like this, particularly in the developed world. Week in and week out, US agriculture commodities are among the most affordable in the world. I track these commodities all over the world every week, and pretty much always were cheaper. So even though China is farming corn by hand with family farm labor, our corn is cheaper. Cost of production far cheaper because of our ability to scale. For one person to cover so many acres, even that big expensive piece of equipment spread over so many acres still makes our corn and wheat and commodities cheaper than those produced by hand in the third world. All right, let's talk about number 2, more money. So number 1 was more people, number 2 is more money. Global food demand. The global middle class is set to rise from 2 billion in 2014 to 5 billion by 2030. That's a 3 billion head increase in the global middle class. Think about this. These are consumers that use cell phones, that buy their food in grocery stores as opposed to live markets or wet markets. They save money to buy a car. This is incredible. That's 10 times the size of America. 3 billion people, that's almost 10 times the size of America. And it's happening. We're already part of the way through it. China's adding 850 million middle-class consumers from 2009 to 2030. That China retail food section is now $45 billion. This is a country, 20 years ago, I'd go to China and you'd go to the villages and I mean poor, kids without shoes, dirt floors, very poor. You go to the villages of China now, they're still very poor, but they all have a TV, they have cell phones, their kids mostly have shoes on, unless they take them off like my kids do in the summer. But it's completely changed. This is happening in the third world. It's happening in countries like Indonesia and Brazil, all over. Look at Mexico. The growth in Mexico has been incredible in per capita incomes. So there's new opportunities. It changes the demand for agriculture, further processed, consumer-ready food products. The demand in Asia is through the roof. But this is a huge pull on global agriculture. So here's global GDP, total economic output, the total combined GDP of the world. There's actual, there's projected. That's according to the World Bank, the IMF, and that's all inflation adjusted. If you look carefully, the slope of the orange bars is getting steeper than the slope of the blue bars, and the blue bars has increased, right? That's that increasing global middle class. It's not due to massive population growth, it's due to income growth, the wealth. So being the data nerd that I am, I downloaded the data for global meat and poultry consumption, all meat and poultry consumed on Earth for the last 50 years, roughly. And then I scatter plotted that against total global GDP. And I get this almost perfect line. It's a 0.996 correlation, which means it's almost a perfect fit. So there's two premises here. Beware of spurious correlation. You can show all kinds of correlation. Don't draw the wrong conclusion. There's two options here. Either the more money that people earn, the more meat and poultry they eat. That's one option. The second option is the more meat and poultry they eat, the more money they earn. And I think we know which one that is, right? So taking this data I showed you before, we have a forecast. And I go, hey, with that forecast, I can forecast this now. I can forecast meat and poultry consumption, and there's what it looks like. If I run that trend line out to 2030 and do the math, it says we're going to have 37 billion more global GDP. That generates demand for 120 million tons more meat and poultry consumption. Just from 2018 to 2030, in 12 years, we need 120 million tons more meat and poultry if this relationship continues and if their GDP forecast is correct. What do I think about that? I don't think it's possible. I think that curve is going to flatten out and go horizontal because I don't think we can produce meat and poultry that quickly. In the last 12 years, we produced 75 million tons more meat and poultry. They're asking for 120 in the next 12 years. Pretty shocking to think about. And again, it's not from 78 million new consumers a year, that's part of it, but it's due to those 3 billion that are joining the global middle class. You can break it apart and look at it by species, which is kind of interesting. Beef is a luxury item globally. It takes a lot more GDP growth to move the needle higher on beef. But look at pork and poultry. GDP growth is like rocket fuel for pork and poultry demand. GDP grows, people eat more. Think about it in the third world, Africa, South America, Southeast Asia. A lot of people live on rice and beans. And what do when they make a little more money? They start eating more chicken. They start eating pork. And all of a sudden that takes off. So let's shift gears to megatrend number 3. Number 1 was people, number 2 is more money, number 3 is China. And China's fascinating. I've been following China, traveling to China for most of the last 20 years. And it always leaves me confused. It's the ultimate riddle, it really is. The government policy, what they do with agriculture, it's just so backwards and fascinating, and it feels so wrong, but somehow it all works. The government control of all the farms. The government owns all farms. Every farmer leases land from the government. Crazy stuff. Look at that picture on the left. That's December 7th, 2020. I just put that on yesterday. This just came out. It's a Reuters article if you want to look it up. Flush with cash, Chinese hog producer builds the world's largest pig farm. If you look closely, those are 6-story and 7-story buildings. There's 21 of them. They're hog farms. Down the right side, you can see they're putting in the manure lagoons. They have their own feed mill. They have their own processing plant. Pigs will not leave or enter. They'll bring in their genetic stock, and the pigs will be farrow to finish. 21 barns. There's 85,000 sows that will be stocking that farm. Unbelievable. Leave it to the Chinese to build a hog farm that maybe we'll be able to see from space, right? But that's what's going on. We'll talk more about that in a minute and why they're doing that. China's fascinating numerically, and also I talked about the rising incomes. This is a water park in China. Now, I've been to a water park on a busy day, and I kind of pull up to the parking lot and look at the water park and go, ugh, it's pretty busy today. Kids all go running. I've never seen one like this. And the most shocking thing, most of the people in that picture are smiling, right? If you stuffed Americans in a pool like that, nobody would be smiling. The guy in the middle, he's looking like this is the best day ever. This is the Guangzhou train station during Chinese New Year a few years ago. I mean, it's just unbelievable what happens when you put that many people with economic growth. You see it all in China. It's incredible. Like I say, it always leaves me confused how things work, their economics, their agriculture, very confusing. But the big change for China is money, and people are making more money. And that has completely changed global markets from cell phones to computers to fill in the blank, automobiles. I'm just fascinated when I go to China to look at the automobiles. I see every kind of car there is. And I always try and see what car brand is doing the best in China. I mean, Buick is a big brand in China. They love Buick. They love minivans. I see Volkswagens. I see about 7 different brands that are Chinese characters I can't pronounce. I have no idea what they are. But it's just unbelievable what's happened over the last 20 years in China. Now, from a food standpoint, China consumes 52% of the world's peanuts. I didn't know that. I doubt many people did, but you look at how much they weigh on these global markets. It's absolutely amazing. They consume 44% of the world's pork, soy meal, soy oil, corn, 24% of the world's corn consumed in China, 17% of the world's wheat. But look at butter and cheese, dairy. That's the one thing you do not see much of in China. I've only seen cheese in very, very small amounts at Pizza Hut in China, and it's not the same Pizza Hut we have. They just historically have not eaten very much dairy. They use a lot of dairy for baby infant formula. That has driven the global dairy markets, their demand for for infant formula, but on their daily basis, you just don't see dairy. It's the thing I miss most when I go to China is I come home just hungry for cheese and milk. But they weigh heavily on all of these global markets. The China math has taunted farmers for years, but it's always been a complicated relationship. US agriculture exporters have been frustrated for decades. The cotton guys said, we're going to send so much cotton to China, fill in the blank, you know, horticulture, crops, nuts, corn, pork, beef, chicken, everything. But what about the phase one deal? So last year, President Trump and the Chinese agreed to a phase one deal where they committed to buy $37.5 billion of US agriculture this year and more next. The peak ever was 25 billion. Let's take a look at that. Here's our ag exports to China. 2020, you can see what we've shipped. That last little dotted line on November, December, that's what we would need to reach the goal. We're not going to reach the goal. However, you can see here, 2019, we shipped about $10 billion in ag exports to China, more than half of it soybeans. Thus far in 2020, January through October, we're already at 17 billion on this chart. And we've got the two biggest months of the year to go. We could see a record year for agriculture exports to China. It won't be what they agreed to, but it could be a record year. So it is pretty interesting to see what that deal has done. It's been more than just the purchase agreement. Most people focus on that purchase agreement. However, the market to US beef and poultry was opened. China was not buying any US beef or virtually no US beef and very little poultry. And because of what's happened in pork, we'll talk in just a minute, they're buying a lot of pork. So 2 years ago, we were sending $500 million in meat and poultry to China. 2020, we're going to send 3 billion. 3 billion. China is driving the global protein markets today. I'm going to close my blinds. The sun is coming up here in Idaho finally, and it's starting to shine on me. So here's the big story in China and why China is driving these markets. From 2018 to 2020, African swine fever hit China and led to more than half of their swine herd being culled. Now they have half of the world's swine herd, so let's do that math. You have half of the world's swine herd and you lose half of those. That's 25%. 25% of the world's swine herd died with this disease in China. That's huge. They have the highest per capita consumption rates of pork in the world. 42 million hog farmers in China, most of them with a couple pigs in the backyard. And a very, very fragmented industry. So what does all this mean? Well, African swine fever, you got to understand just a couple brief things about it. The virus is very strong. It's a very hard to kill virus. It kills 95% of the hogs that get it. There is no vaccine. Between Europe and Asia, 75% of the world's swine herd is now threatened. And Chinese pork is 20% of the total global meat and poultry supply. So you can see what's going to happen here with this virus. Losses in China and Vietnam are massive. It has driven global protein inflation, initially for the preferred suppliers like Brazil, but next the global corn markets. China's now restocking. You saw the big picture of the new hog barns. They're restocking, but they banned swill feeding. Garbage feeding is out because of ASF. It was reinfecting the herds. So 30 million tons of feed are now out of the market. The corn markets, Chinese corn prices are up 30% from a year ago. Soybeans almost the same. Brazil is nearly out of corn. Brazil's going through one of the worst droughts they've seen in decades right now, and it's going to get worse based on the forecast. China's government's reporting a successful recovery next year. They're claiming that they're going to rebuild half of their hog sector by 2021. It's not going to happen, but what if they did? Well, here's what this has done to the global markets, this China weight. They went from importing in 2018 about 10 billion of global meat and poultry to 31 billion this year. So if China's right, if they say, okay, we've recovered miraculously, then there's going to be $21 billion of protein without a home, mostly pork. Where's it going to go? It's going to back up everywhere. The good news is, I really don't think they're anywhere close to recovery. I think they're trying to recover. The profits are there, but I think it's going to take years, probably at least 5 years, to truly recover. In the meantime, we're going to have some corrections in the global protein markets. China is the market of the future, and it always will be. China's long enticed global agriculture producers. I talked about that. It's disappointed in nearly every instance. The one exception is soybeans. They buy massive amounts of the world's soybeans. Is this time different? Maybe a little bit due to that growing middle class inside China. They will rebuild their swine sector, but it's going to take years. But they face some very difficult decisions over resources. They have a finite amount of land, water, environmental issues. They need to decide what are our strategic food commodities, because imports are going to have to rise, probably first in corn would be my guess on the next one. But they want to produce their own pork. They'll import a lot of pork, but they'll produce most of it domestically. They can hold on to self-sufficiency longer than most expect. That has been the lesson we've learned over decades of dealing with China on agriculture, is they can hold on to that self-sufficiency. So let's shift gears again. That's why I like this presentation. We just get to bounce around and talk about different things. This is a big switch from what we've talked about. Megatrend number 4, the wealthy 3%. And I mean the wealthy 3% of the planet. Consumers have a tendency to romanticize the past and condemn the present. Is that true? Do we see that out in the marketplace? Factory farming is terrible. We all want to go back to the old ways of how food was produced. The reality is, neither view is fair. What do I mean by that? There never really were any good old days. That picture right there is actually a painting that my father's cousin painted of my father in 1971, the year I was born. Glenn Stuart drove up and painted that picture. And at the time, my dad made a living by feeding cows with a team of horses. That's in my lifetime. And he worked for a rancher. They had about 400 cows, and every day he would go harness his horses and feed cows all winter long with a pitchfork. And I think if he were alive today, he would agree that we probably have things better off than we did back then. Do we really want to go back to those olden days? No, but consumers want to take us back there with food, right? The core principles of food are this. Food has to be safe, affordable, and humanely raised. But it can also be organic, traceable, free range, locally grown. Fill in the blank. It can be a lot of things. We have changing consumers, and maybe I'm getting old. The old thought was food is here to sustain life. It's all about cost. My mom would look at the flyers in the newspaper and say, which store has Campbell's soup cheaper than the other store? Where is bread the cheapest? Clip coupons and say, who has the cheapest price? That's totally out the window now. Food is an identity. And it's not even its own identity, it's our identity. How you identify yourself, how you define yourself, is by what you eat and where you eat and the pictures you post on Instagram of the meal at the restaurant where you eat or the meal you cooked. Consumers want to spend more money on food. It's an image thing. It's a feel-good thing. New products every week. The purchase decision is not about price necessarily. It's about things like the company's foreign policy, political views, sustainability, anything but price. It's absolutely shocking to me. Is the customer always right? That's our question. Marketing 101 says the customer is always right because the customer has money, right? But take a look at this. I remember when coffee at the little gas station in the town where I grew up, coffee was 50 cents a cup. And then this little lady showed up here on the upper left and taught us that no, coffee needs to be a $6 a cup experience. And what do? Buy it, right? Ben & Jerry's ice cream. It's like the only ice cream with its own foreign policy. That's what you get when you buy. You get a feeling. It's how you define yourself. Crazy. So we have opposing forces, and this is what it really boils down to for agriculture today. Our farmers have become the most efficient, productive producers on the planet. They work every day to maximize yield. You ask a farmer, every farmer knows his corn yield. Not just this year, but every year. They know their wheat yields. Everyone tracks that. They're trying to produce more with less. I gotta bump yield. I gotta buy better seed. I gotta buy a better bull next year, whatever it is. And so that's the motivating force of our farm sector. However, the buzzwords on the rise with consumers are organic, natural, antibiotic-free, free-range, locally grown. Every one of those reduces yield. Those are yield-reducing practices. And so that's a lot of the source of this inner conflict in agriculture today. How do we reconcile this? We have little roadside stands popping up everywhere. People are farming chickens in their backyard saying, we don't need factory farms. We all need to farm chickens in our backyard. Do the math sometime on how many chickens we would need in the backyard were we to truly go down that road. It would not be sustainable, and there would be a lot of angry neighbors. So this is the conflict. How do you reconcile this? How do you reconcile productivity, the need for productivity, with the demand for reduced productivity? Well, it's very simple. Very simple. The key is choice. Put both products in the retail case and let consumers choose which one they want. Preserving choice allows both producers and consumers to win because not all consumers want organic milk. I am totally fine with conventional milk. I don't mind organic milk being on the retail shelf at $6 a gallon, as long as my milk at $2.78 a gallon is there next to it. But take away my milk and force me to buy $6 a gallon organic milk, I'm going to be upset. Doesn't sound that complicated. Markets are very good at allocating resources. The problem is there's an agenda out there. There are social agendas, the angry acronyms, PETA, HSUS. There's these social agendas, and they're well-funded and they're very organized, and their goal is to destroy your choice to buy what you want to buy, because their message is the average American is not smart enough to know that organic milk is going to save your life and make you smarter and more productive and wealthier. And so therefore, I don't trust you to choose. I need to go and legislate to get your conventional milk out of the dairy case. That's the problem. That's where this gets really complex. Every Hollywood celebrity will speak out for organic or fill in the blank, whatever. Who will speak for conventional agriculture? The most affordable, safe global food supply on earth is conventionally produced agriculture. It's completely affordable even in the third world. And the voice that speaks for conventional agriculture is the loudest voice on the planet. That voice is price. Price is the loudest voice. And so the key here is preserving choice. Keep in mind, here's something to consider. 89% of the world is poor. I say that 89% of the world lives in a third world country. Here's a focus group. In your honest opinion, what would you prefer, organic food or GMOs? These are starving Africans with an empty bowl. They just want safe, affordable food. So that's the risk we face. Here's my inconvenient truth. This has become my mantra on the topic. It is socially irresponsible to legislate yield-reducing practices. Think about what we just talked about. I have no problem with choice. Produce whatever. I tell dairy farmers all the time. If someone's going to pay you more for organic milk, take their money. If you can produce it, make it work, take their money. That's great. I love that we have so much diversity. But the second we legislate out of production our most competitive production practices, we are going to kick people over the curve. And it won't be here in America. We don't notice food inflation. Our food is so cheap. But the third world, boy, when we imposed ethanol policy, drove corn prices through the roof. In Haiti, they couldn't afford cornmeal. They were making dirt cakes because of the cost of cornmeal. The third world feels food inflation way more severely than we do. Now is not the time to legislate a whole level of cost, not just on us, but on the world. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up here. Here's my summary. So more people, what does that mean for global agriculture? Very good for global agriculture. More money? Absolutely. What about China? China is a complicated opportunity. It's a huge opportunity, but it is complicated, and the political baggage will always keep it complicated. But it is very good for global agriculture. What about the wealthy 3%? Huge challenge for conventional agriculture, ultimately a risk to the global food supply. Global dynamics ensure rising demand ahead for global food producers. And I'll end with this thought here. This is Charles Darwin, the father of evolution. It is not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives. But the species that survives is the one that is able best to adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself. You don't have to be the smartest, you don't have to be the biggest or the strongest, but you darn well better learn how to adapt to a changing environment. I think that's a fantastic message from science to business and to agriculture. We look at the dairy sector, we look at the hog sector, the poultry sector. You better learn how to adapt and adjust. With that, I will wind it up.
Thank you, Brett. Fascinating topic, and I look forward to digging into it just a bit deeper with you when we have our upcoming podcast on the subject. Before we get started answering questions, we'd like to share a brief video, and then we'll be right back to answer the questions submitted during today's presentation.
At Balchem Animal Nutrition and Health, we strive every day to deliver results you can see in your animal's productivity and your bottom line. From a smooth transition into the milking string for your fresh cows, to a happy welcome home from your furry friend. From a strong start in your poultry flock, to consistent weight gains for your finishing hogs. We expect to earn your business and your trust with our people, our products, and our science. Our people have an intense passion for your animals and your success. You can count on us for honest, candid advice and practical solutions for your toughest challenges. As the global leader in choline production, chelation, and encapsulation technology, we take our obligation to you and to the environment seriously. Our products are backed by the most extensive and thorough research portfolio, while our business is committed to advancing environmental sustainability and animal welfare. In the end, it all comes down to results. Balchem delivers real results you can count on, results that exceed your expectations, and results that bring true value to your bottom line. Leading the charge to meet the nutritional needs of ruminants, monogastrics, and companion animals, Balchem offers a growing portfolio of nutritional products and a dedication to innovation and industry sustainability. Balchem is here to solve today and shape tomorrow.
All right, as a reminder, you can still submit questions to the questions pane on your control panel. Brett, our first question comes in from Caroline. What about ecological costs? I assume a small-scale Chinese farmer causes less CO2 emissions than U.S. high-efficiency farmer.
That is a great question. And my answer is this: it's complicated. I've been fascinated to follow some of the research that we're finding out on CO2 emissions in agriculture production, because the initial out the gate story was agriculture is a huge greenhouse gas emitter, and a lot of the ways that we produce food today is increasing that. And if you look, I mean, from the cattle standpoint, we found that Brazilian cattle produce a lot more CO2 than US feedlot cattle. And the reason is because our feedlot cattle are slaughtered at 21 months of age. The Brazilian cattle are close to 40 months of age. It takes them longer to grow, and they spend a lot more time living and breathing and belching methane. Some of that is true for crops, but it is complex. Now, you look at what they do in China, one of the problems is they over-fertilize some things, they under-fertilize others. They rarely use hog manure for fertilizer in China, rarely. And so they have a lot of ground that's completely nutrient deficit. But then they have their hothouse greenhouses that they completely overuse fertilizer, heavily use. And so from an ecological standpoint, it is complicated, and you really have to dig in and try to get to real data and real analysis. What I found over the last 10 years is that it isn't what we thought. And some of the production trends we have, GMOs, those kind of things, actually significantly reduce our carbon footprint and our pollution footprint. And so I guess, I don't know, we could talk commodity by commodity. I'm probably not the guy to do it, but I found some resources that I follow. If you want to email me, I can send you some of those resources. I have some Twitter people I follow that do some great research on that, and a few other sources. Sorry, that wasn't a very good answer to your question.
No, but just kind of a follow-up question to that. You talked that we're going to have the ability to feed the population going forward. We have the technology. I'm just kind of curious as to your overall thoughts in terms of, are we going to be able to do this sustainably? And two, from a megatrend perspective, are there any technology trends that you see that's going to help us feed the globe sustainably?
Yeah, great question. Yes, and as we spread productivity around the world, we get much more sustainable. It completely increases sustainability, not in every situation, but by and large, like I say, those corn farmers in China, people farming 3 hogs in their backyard, as sustainable as that sounds, multiply that by 40 million, and it's somewhat of an ecological mess compared to what we can do with hogs in barns with manure management. One of the things you find, especially in the swine sector, you put hogs in barns, you have a nutritionist, you have a veterinarian, your death loss plummets, your disease management increases, animal welfare increases, the animals are healthier, happier, safer. You think, 30 years ago, we were farming hogs outside in Iowa and Nebraska in the winter. Go open the doors on those factory farms and see how many hogs want to go outside in January. They're in climate control, they have music, they have veterinarians on staff. And so when you put that kind of productivity, especially for a country like China, you could reduce pollution enormously in a much more sustainable fashion of commercial, industrialized, or productive agriculture than you can with everyone. Think about it in the US. If everyone had 16 chickens in their backyard, and I mean everyone, every American, imagine what it would look like. You would have disease, you would have a lot of other problems. And so, yeah, we can do it very sustainably. Your second question about new technologies, that's a good question. Technology is fun to follow in agriculture. It's absolutely fascinating to see what we've done. The GPS tractors, I think that's amazing what we can do. I think the real opportunity in ag technology right now is in monitoring systems. There's so much data that can be captured, and think about this. If you can capture the data from every harvester going in America, and we can track, say, a county in Western Kansas, a big wheat county, and say, okay, we can track every harvester and see wheat yield. We can know how much fertilizer was used. We can know what the rainfall was in every county, and you consolidate that into big data and start analyzing. We can become much, much better at farming than we can as thousands of individual farmers making all our own decisions based on what we know in our little space. In hog barns, they're putting microphones in that can detect coughing. So you can say, okay, the cough rate is increasing in this barn, in this space, we need to get on it. I think anything involved in monitoring and scouring data is going to help us increase our own productivity and our sustainability in big ways going forward. That's just one piece of technology. I know there's a lot more out there than that.
So related to that, that Chinese hog farm, that high-rise, if you will, that you showed us, is kind of the poster child for factory farming. What's the Chinese consumer feeling about intensive farming, and do you see that changing in the future?
Yeah, see, that's a good question because it feels just opposite of where we're going, right? If we did that in the US, oh, you'd have protesters, 85,000 sows, farrow to finish on one site, manure lagoons. It would not, you would have protesters everywhere. No protesters in China. No one is protesting that. One, because protesting's a much more significant decision in China than it is here. But two, it's a different sentiment. It's hard to get a read on Chinese consumers, but they are far, far removed from this world that we're in, by and large, in China, about animal welfare, sustainability, those kind of things. I mean, you got to realize they live in smog every day. They're one generation away from people that really, truly did not have enough food. A lot of people, a huge percentage of the population, one generation ago, had some pretty severe trials. And so they're a little bit removed from that. Maybe they'll get to that point. But I just don't, when I go to China, talk to people, I go to retail stores, I just don't see that message real strongly of, hey, we have concerns with factory farming. Factory farming is pretty new in China. And I think most Chinese are going, what's safe, wholesome, affordable food? There's probably an end out there that follows that, but I get asked the question a lot about alternative proteins, right? About Beyond Meat, vegetable-based protein, and how that plays in. And those guys are in China. I've been at the big food shows in China and seen Beyond Meat's booth there. But I'm on one hand, the Chinese have been eating tofu for hundreds of years, right? They've been eating vegetable-based proteins. But on the other side of that, I don't see the same sentiment that I see here in the US. You just don't feel that in China. They want new food, they want different food. They're adopting westernized foods very quickly. I just think they're a couple steps down the trail from where the Western world is when it comes to those kind of issues.
So kind of transitioning from China, Matthew would like to know, what do we see for Africa? There's a large population there, a lot of land.
Yeah, great question, Matthew. Yeah, what about Africa? Africa is the last frontier. It's the last big plot of unplowed productive land on Earth. And it's a tragic story. It's a tragic history, and it's still tragic. How do you fix Africa? You think of, you know, the Gates Foundation. They're spending millions and millions on how do you fix Africa. No one has cracked the nut yet. The problem with Africa is probably just too many AK-47s and greedy dictators. And I don't know how to solve that. But Africa will play a major piece in the world agriculture balance sheet going forward, because it is it's our last unplowed acres of good productive land. Now, you don't want to go plow up all of the savanna in Africa, but markets will take it there. The key in my mind to fixing Africa is market access. You've got to be able to get the structures in place so that they can produce and export outside of Africa. I know Europe, because of Europe's anti-GMO sentiment, Europe buys a lot of soybeans out of some of those African nations. Small farmer soybean production, almost to the point that it's detrimental to the African poultry industry, because the Europeans can bid such premiums for those organic soybeans that there aren't enough soybeans and corn to feed the domestic poultry farms. Africa or Europe is pulling hard on that supply. There's countries where that's actually a problem. Africa's complicated. It's fascinating. I think the countries to watch in Africa, watch Nigeria. Nigeria is now the largest economy in Africa, complete massive population, unable to sustain food self-sufficiency. It'll be interesting to see what they do in Nigeria the next 20 years in terms of how they feed their people. But I think it's going to take, it's just going to take generational change in Africa. But again, as food supplies tighten, prices go up and farmers respond. And because of productivity, we've just never hit that point yet where prices go up significantly to where those farmers truly can respond. There is change, and it is slow in Africa.
Brett, they obviously have a lot of geography there, right? Can you talk a little bit about do they have the climate and the water to be able to feed their population if they could get some of these political issues ironed out?
Yeah, yeah, and they do. Depends by country. Now, North Africa, the north third of Africa is just absolute desert. There's very little productive ground. The coast of the Mediterranean, Morocco, Tunisia, those countries have some very good productive ground along the coast. But by and large, the north, you go into continental Africa, they have some fantastic climates. Uganda, Ethiopia, they have some black soil that grows corn like you wouldn't believe. I know some investment groups, some charitable investment groups that have went into Uganda and helped farm. And they go in and they'll lease a farmer's farm. They'll lease half of it and farm it, and they'll help him farm the other half. They'll bring in technology and equipment. And it's incredible some of the yields that they get out of places like Uganda, which most of the country is unfarmed. It's just pasture land, black soil that could grow a lot of things. And so, yeah, from Uganda, even on down into Central Africa, there's a subtropical climate. A lot of our cocoa comes out of Africa, some of those kind of things. But boy, it's a tough neighborhood for farming.
Yeah, thank you for that. Our next question comes in from Rolf from the Netherlands. It says, hello, Brett. It took Europe decades to develop the pig sector to its current modern farming. And as China's pig farmers are still mainly backyard farming, would you think that China will be able to produce enough pork for self-sufficiency in the coming 10 years? I know you kind of touched on that a bit.
Yeah.
I guess the time horizon here is 10 years.
Great question, Rolf. That's a great question. And you go to China, if you ever have a chance to go to China and see the swine sector, it is boggling and fascinating. You've got, well, let's start out. Before ASF killed half of their herd, 12% of their production was on scale farms, big commercial farms, 12%. The rest was small farmers. Today, I would guess that those big commercial farmers are probably 30% because it's a smaller herd and they're heavy investment. So they might be 30% of production, which means 70% is still small farmers. Now, these small farmers are high cost, they're not as productive, but that evolution is happening. The thing that happened in China, because of the big loss and the huge shortages of pork today, profits are through the roof. So hog profits last week in China were $280 a head. Hog margins in the US are -15 to +15, depending on where we're at, dollars per head. They've been upwards of $300 a head for over a year in China. So that's driving that investment. Muyan Foods that built that big commercial hog farm, Muyan reported $3 billion in profits, US $3 billion in 9 months this year. That's how heavily profitable hogs are. And so fast forward and say, what's going to happen? When you have that kind of profit, you're going to have heavy investment. Those big guys are going to expand. The government loves the big farms. They make cheap money for them, free loans, those kind of things. They're really encouraging the big guys to expand. Again, I think it takes years. You look at that 85,000 sow unit, 21 buildings in that block. You would have to build almost 200 of those farms if you wanted to commercialize the sector today. 200 of those. They're nowhere near that. And I think, Rolf, that I think within 5 years, China will be 90 to 95% self-sufficient in pork, but it's going to take years. And I think they'll probably settle around that 95, 90% range. Now, 90% self-sufficiency means there's still 5 million tons of pork imported, which is massive on the global pork scale. And so they're going to be massive importers, but they will produce a lot more pork. I think what they're going to give up is corn. And I think they're going to be importing a lot more corn in 5 years than they are now to sustain that.
All right, I see that we're getting toward the top of the hour here. Brett, this has been fascinating. I do have one last question for you, though. We'll go, this one comes in from Carrie. Does the China trade war end under a Biden administration?
Yeah, that's a good question. Good question. And somewhat unknown. I think if you listen to Biden's rhetoric, he's been very tough on China, very tough. He actually came out and called President Xi a thug, which is a little bit hard to come back from. They're going to be negotiating together. And as tough as Trump was, Trump was, as we know, very tough on China, but he was always very cordial to President Xi. He would say things like, President Xi and I have never been closer, and we talk and whatever. It's going to be very different. The Biden administration will likely be an administration that seeks to build a coalition to continue to keep pressure on China. And Trump was, I don't have time for anyone else. It's us and you, and I'm going to tweet my policy. And we're going to put tariffs on this, and we're going to put tariffs on that. That all ends under Biden administration. I think politics will slow down. Trade politics will slow down. If the U.S. says, okay, we want to go get Japan on board and Europe on board, and we want to build a coalition to pressure China, everything goes into slow motion, very slow motion. But I think the pressure will stay. The big question is, does Biden keep the tariffs? I don't know if Biden keeps the tariffs or not. He spoke out against tariffs. The tariffs have been somewhat effective in certain industries. The big question is steel tariffs. The first round of tariffs that went on China were Section 232, steel and aluminum tariffs, designed to subsidize U.S. steel production, to bring back a U.S. steel industry. To some degree that's happened, but I don't know if those continue. Those steel tariffs resulted in a 25% tariff on U.S. pork going to China. That tariff still stands today. We still pay 25% tariffs on U.S. pork to China. And so I don't know. I think that'll be the bellwether to watch, is to see what Biden does with the steel tariffs in place from the Trump administration. But I think a lot of that's going to soften. I think it's going to slow down. But I think the Biden administration will continue to put pressure on China.
Very well, that's going to do it for today, folks. I want to thank you, Mr. Stuart, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. If you have additional questions, please submit them to anh.marketing@balchem.com, and we'll forward them along with the unanswered questions from today's session. The next Real Science Lecture Series webinar will be after we turn the calendar to 2021. On January 5th, we will hear from Dr. Brian Aldrich from the University of Illinois as he reviews how to maintain a healthy ruminant digestive tract for our ruminant audiences. Then on January 12th, we will have a very unique opportunity to talk to Dr. Mark Post from Maastricht University in the Netherlands. He will share the science behind lab-based meat production. Now, while we don't support cultured meat production, we do feel it's important to understand the potential competitors to animal agriculture. Visit balchemanh.com/realscience for more details and to register. Also, don't miss Balchem's new podcast series. The Real Science Exchange is an extension of the Real Science webinar series where you'll get to know top researchers like you've never known them before. Go behind the scenes to hear the conversations that take place over a few drinks with friends. Search for Real Science Exchange on your favorite podcast platform. Episode 5 will release tonight, so be sure to subscribe. You can also listen to all the past episodes at balchemanh.com/podcast. On behalf of Balchem and Mr. Stuart, thank you for joining us today.